everyone, welcome back to WCB Jazz Vinyl. So what I wanted to talk today about is actually building a set list, like being a DJ of vintage jazz vinyl and building a set list. Not entirely just that, because what I really wanted to talk about was like new finds. But what occurred to me is that I have about a dozen titles or so from the last about maybe a couple of weeks or about a month. And I think on each of them, I've sort of isolated a track or so that I would like definitely put on a DJ set list. And so, listen, let's be real. Like I am an amateur DJ at best, right? Like I don't do beat matching. I barely know how to operate the multiple turntables at the same time. But I've been doing some of these gigs locally. And I think when I talk about like DJ, I think a little bit more of what I'm getting at is like, again, how to build a set list. Like what are appropriate tracks to put on in like a cocktail bar or a coffee bar, something like that. Because I know a lot of people that are out there that collect vinyl are either thinking about this or actually getting into this or being asked to get into it. And maybe there's, I don't know, maybe you just don't know where to start. So I'm going to kind of merge these two things. These are like records that I've recently found, as well as some of the tracks that are on them that I think are perfectly appropriate, especially in this day and age, to be on a set list at one of these bars. So as always, before we get into it, please do go ahead and hit like. Of course, you can subscribe to my channel, and you can follow me on Instagram. I'm at what_can_brown. All right, so sort of to kick things off, one of the things that I've noticed about whenever I build a DJ set is that, I try to put myself in the headspace of like, if I was at this particular bar, what would I want to hear? And lately I've been doing a lot of like cocktail bars and wine bars. And obviously I've been doing some radio too, but the radio stuff is very prescribed in terms of what I'm actually able to play. So when I get to choose the set list, again, for some of these local bars, the funny thing is that by and large, all of the music that I end up choosing is between like 1968 and like 1976 or so. And in fact, usually it kind of like hovers in that like early 70s stuff. And what I end up trying to do is actually mix in more sort of modern stuff, like stuff of the last like, year or two in terms of jazz to sort of mix things up. But I always find it's hard to get out of that like 68 to like 76 time period. And lately, when I've been picking up some of these albums, and in fact albums that I'm seeking out, I find myself like laser focused in on that time period because the beats are like catchy and they're toe tapping and they just seem like, despite the fact that it's old, it's stuff that people would want to hear now. And I think a lot of times you end up hearing some similar sort of elements in modern music as well. And so I think for those reasons and probably more, that's why I've sort of gravitated into this sort of narrow window. So speaking of window, the first one that I wanted to talk about, that was an unintentional segue, is called Windows by O'Donnell Levy or Levy. So this was put out on Groove Merchant. I believe this was actually recorded in 1976. So on the tail end, excuse me, of that window that I just mentioned. Um, there's a bunch of musicians here. There's strings. Like one of the things about especially later 70s stuff is that heavy production in terms of the number of artists, in terms of overdubbing, and that kind of thing. And I think that's to some degree the technology that's put into some of these later, even later 70s recordings ends up making them seem even just a little bit more modern, I guess, and therefore something that people would want to hear today because it sounds just a little bit more like what you'd hear on the radio versus some of the kind of stuffy, like, mid 50s stuff that just sounds too vintage, right? Like if you're at a cocktail bar and it's not just a quiet jazz cocktail bar, people want to hear stuff that's like a bridge. So anyway, I picked this up. I didn't have to spend much on this. And actually, I actually want to say that every single record that I'm going to show you is from this one particular seller that's out in Las Vegas that I've made videos about in the past, because I've just been continually getting, like every 2 weeks, I continually get more and more from this particular seller who I just deal with directly. So anyway, what I want to call out though, as I bring up each of these albums, is not just what is the album, and who is the musician, and in this case, obviously guitarist O'Donnell Levy or Levy, but what is the track, right? So for me, and honestly, probably, and I haven't previewed this, probably for a lot of them, it's going to end up being the first track or two. And I've found when DJing, like more often than not, it's either the first track or the second track. And I think to some degree that was the choice of the record labels wanting to make sure they put the catchy stuff up front, but also knowing that they're sending some of these records out to radio DJs who need to be able to easily queue up the record, which ends up being easy for me to queue up in a club, which means track one. It's the easiest thing to do. You don't have to like be like, oh no, I accidentally got it on track 2 or 3. Queue it right up at the beginning, super easy, and I think they did that intentionally. So in this case, as will be the case probably in a bunch of these, it's the first track and it's called Panama Red. So go and preview Panama Red. It kind of starts out maybe a little bit like you won't necessarily think that this is conducive to, again, a set list. But what you'll realize is this man's guitar solos are absolutely fantastic. Super toe tapping, really catchy kind of track. All right, next one up is by Gary Bartz, and this is actually not the only record that I'm going to show by Gary Bartz because I've been getting a bunch in, again, from that same seller. So this is Juju Man, originally put out on the Catalyst label. I feel the need to talk about the dates on each one of these because I just have a feeling that it's going to kind of coalesce around the same time period. This one is 1976. So two in a row by in the same year, although the track that I'm going to recommend in terms of a DJ set is actually not the first track because the first track, which is the title track, Juju Man, is very much a sort of ode to a Love Supreme. And I don't think anybody would justify a Love Supreme being on like a cocktail bar, like a high energy sort of cocktail bar, kind of track. Because remember, just because it's a famous track doesn't mean it makes it has a place in a set list, right? You want stuff that people, I don't know, at least for me, you don't want stuff that's like so overtly memorable. You also don't want really heady music. You want to keep the energy up again because a lot of these bars are trying to get people to buy drinks and such, and you don't want something sleepy. You don't want something that people are going to pay too close attention to that's going to take away their attention from their conversation, right? So it's not going to be Juju Man. And honestly, My Funny Valentine is also not something that I would put on a DJ list. But the track Straight Street, which is track 3 or the last track on side 1, just a little bit unusual to have as the recommended, the last track on a side, having that be the recommended one for a DJ set. Just because, again, if you're somebody like me who's an amateur, it's a little bit harder to queue up in the low light. But really great track, actually by John Coltrane, which is also a little bit unusual to be on a DJ set to have a Coltrane track. But I assure you, the version here is definitely that. It is it's a nice energy. It's about a 6.5 minute song or so. Length of song usually doesn't dictate whether I'm going to put it on a set. I'll do 3-minute tracks. I'll do 10-minute plus tracks. Doesn't really matter to me because the longer it is, just the more of a good thing, right? All right, the next one up is by Harold Land, and the album title is Choma. So this was put out on the Mainstream label, 1971, so a little bit earlier, but definitely still in the 70s. This is just a really great record. In my opinion, one of the best on the entire Mainstream label, and Harold Land does have a few, and each of them are worthwhile. You do have Bobby Hutcherson on this, which I think is worth calling out, as well as Harold Land Jr., presumably Harold Land's son, who plays piano on this. Didn't read the liner notes ahead of time to verify that. Woody Theus on drums, Reggie Johnson on bass. I mean, it's a great lineup overall. This one is a little bit unusual, and one of the reasons why I definitely wanted to discuss this is that I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier that you don't want something that's too heady. I think on a DJ set list, you want to have stuff that, like, it doesn't have to be concise. It just has to be a little bit more toe tapping and not kind of like, I don't know. You don't want to think too much. I guess while you're listening to music in a bar, unless it's specifically just a listening bar and people are supposed to be quiet, and that doesn't tend to be what I'm building set lists for. So despite all of that, the track that I would choose on this one is Up and Down, which is the last track, and it's over 10 minutes long. This is something that is a little bit headier, but because there's an established rhythm and because I don't think that the soloists stray too far, and I also want to say it's a little bit in a modal kind of vibe, it's enough, I don't want to say monotony, it's enough consistency, I think, that despite the 10 minutes, you don't necessarily feel that the time is passing. And again, it's just high energy the whole time. Now, if I was going to put something like this in a DJ set, I would probably sandwich it with shorter tracks on either side, probably more in like a soul and funk vein, because you don't want to have like multiple tracks like Up and Down, in a row, because that is kind of when you get people to be checking their watches or being like, wait, where am I right now? And should we leave kind of thing. But again, it still belongs in a set list. It's a little bit of a, I want to just say a time passer because it's a fantastic, fantastic track. But I feel like it's one of those things that if there are jazz aficionados in the room, they're going to really appreciate it and come up and be like, "Hey, what was that you just played?" And even people who aren't are going to allow it because it's enough sort of propulsion and enough energy that they're going to be able to again to listen to it and not be not be terribly distracted, I guess. All right, so this one is a little bit on the early side. This is actually 1966, but again, just got it in and is definitely something I would add to a set list. So this is called Tough by Pucho and the Latin Soul Brothers, originally put out on Prestige, again, 1966. So the reason why I wanted to bring this one up is that as I'm building set lists, I don't typically like to have tracks that are overly familiar. And I know that a lot of people would advocate, hey, like the way to bring in the audience is every now and then give them something that's familiar. And I do get that. Like I understand the idea of giving something to people that they want to hear. I usually don't like to do like the version of the song that they're familiar with. I like to do a different version so that it's like kind of vaguely familiar. Or at least like not immediately apparent. And so good example is this record because track one is Cantaloupe Island, which was written by Herbie Hancock. And rather than put on the Blue Note version of Cantaloupe Island, why not put on the Pucho and the Latin Soul Brothers version? Because it's different. It's a little bit more, even more Latin than the original. And it's one of those things that people will hear the cues, they'll hear the melody and be like, wait, I know that, but I don't know this version. It's like a little bit of a twist. It's something different. And so again, when I mix stuff in that people know, it's something like this, or it's a jazz standard, but it's not the standard version that they're familiar with. And I don't know, I'm not intentionally trying to give people something they're not familiar with. It's just that I don't want to play stuff that feels like obvious or like derivative. And sometimes I do break with that. Sometimes I do want to play something that is just super familiar that all of a sudden people are going to stop and be like, I know that song. But my goal typically in a lot of these DJ sets is not for people to stop. It's not for people to break conversation, not for people to take their attention away and all of a sudden pay attention to the music. Again, unless I'm in a very sort of careful, like, sort of focused listening bar, which I don't usually, do DJ work in. So anyway, again, that's the reason why I pick Cantaloupe Island from this one. All right, so this next one is another one by Gary Bartz. I mentioned more were going to come, and I think there's actually even more that are in this stack that I'm going to show you. So Gary Bartz, Another Earth. This was put out in 1968 on the Milestone label. Thing to know about Gary Bartz is that typically with his albums, you're going to get stuff that's like longer, super long format, heady kind of stuff that's not as conducive to a set list. You're also going to get stuff that he sings on that, in my opinion, is not always conducive to a set list, but you'll also usually get something a little bit shorter, a little bit more toe tapping straight ahead. And even though I enjoy his albums in their entirety, that shorter stuff, that toe tapping stuff is the sort of stuff that I like to put in a DJ set list. So the one off of this album that, to be fair, I guess is a little bit more almost like hard bop in sound, maybe leaning into post bop, is the track UFO. So again, even though I really enjoy the whole album and in fact probably prefer some of the other tracks, a lot of times you don't want to play your most favorite track in a set list, because if you're trying to make sure that your audience has a good time, you don't want to like the point is not to try to convince them that you know a lot about music or that you can pull obscure tracks or that your taste is really good necessarily. It's a little bit more of like, what do they want to hear? And in my opinion, on this record, the one that probably most people are going to want to hear at a club when they aren't just showing up to hear like really obtuse jazz music, they want to hear UFO. All right, if you don't know Billy Butler, definitely encourage you to seek out more of his stuff, learn more about Billy Butler, the guitarist. But this is one of my favorite of his records. This is called Guitar Soul, features Selden Powell, Sonny Phillips, Bob Bushnell, and Specs Powell. And I have to say, like, I only just discovered this recently. Again, all of these are from the same seller, and a lot of times I've been getting these things in because I see them and I'm like, I've never heard that before, and I'd love to hear it for the first time on vinyl. Um, this is an example of a record that I only just learned about. 1969. Um, and the track is Blow for the Crossing. It is over 9 minutes long. It's the very first track on side one, and it is absolutely phenomenal. It's like blues and soul forward, amazing, amazing sort of guitar feature, pedal effects. I want to say there's like baritone sax and like organ involved, and there's a lot of things that even on its surface you're going to be like, that doesn't sound that interesting. This is such a vibe, and it's fantastic. It's one of those things that no one in the room is going to ever have heard, but everybody's going to really enjoy. And again, is one of those things that people will come up to you afterwards and say like, what the hell are we are we listening to right now? All right, Gary Bartz is back, and this album is called Juju Street Song. So, 1972, this was put out on the Prestige label as well. There's a lot of great stuff that you can play in a DJ set that was put out on Prestige or Milestone or Muse and some of these other labels, right? But this is another fantastic example by Gary Bartz. Remember that there is a bunch of music on here where he's singing. I don't tend to choose those songs for DJ set lists, at least that I curate, just because sometimes when so much of it's instrumental, when there is vocalists, all of a sudden there's, again, it's like attention directed away, and it can kind of like, I don't know, for me sometimes it can break up the vibe. Like, don't get me wrong, I always incorporate some stuff with vocals, but usually for this type of format I'm not going to be including too much Gary Bartz with vocals. That being said, the track that I do like to include on a set list is the opener, I Want to Be Where You Are. It's like 10 minutes long, but it's a really nice groove. It's just excellent. Again, high energy. I don't like to incorporate ballads or stuff that really slows things down. Like, I do like having varying tempos, but I don't want stuff that's going to be too slow. And again, I don't want free jazz. I don't want atonal stuff. And I like stuff that sets a groove, that kind of sticks to it. And it doesn't mean that it's not interesting. It's just that I don't know. I like to kind of keep things relatively contained, and if I am going to change the mood, it's going to be incremental as the track list goes, rather than sort of ping ponging all over the place. I will say that if I was going to include another one, Bertha Baptist, which is the opener on side two, I would include, or sometimes if I'm bringing like 30 or 40 records to a gig, if I have more time, or if I decide that I want like to change up the mood because what I thought was going to play well isn't, it's always nice to have a second track from some of these albums that you pick that's kind of like a backup, right? And so if even if I was going to play I Want to Be Where You Are, and that's my sort of go-to from this album, nice to have again another one on the other side that you could queue up as well. All right, so this may be a new one for some of you because, well, I don't know. I'm not saying that you all don't have different tastes, but this is a little bit more outside of the realm of what I typically will cover on this channel, right? That's a little bit more in the pocket of like, you know, call it jazz, at least before the 80s. This one was put out in 1980. It's called Midnight Sun by John Stubblefield. It was put out on the Sutra label. This one, the reason why I bring this up is not only because I got it in and it's from that same seller and it kind of made sense. Um, One of the things that I've realized is that stuff that ventures into fusion and then that extends into the 80s is getting more and more popular. People want to hear this stuff. And again, I think that there's elements of this type of music that is, that you're going to hear in new music as well. And so I think that's one of the reasons why people are kind of going back to it. And what I've noticed, I think, especially on the track Free Spirits, which is track two on this, that it has enough of the fusion. It's still sort of jazzed and kind of like explorative, and it's admittedly it is a little bit sort of headier, more cerebral music than what I would normally put on a set list. But there's a time and place for that, again, because people do want to hear this type of sound. I think there's a time and place for that, and it is not this is all my opinion, right? Again, it's not like I'm that experienced doing it. It's just when I do it, it just feels like it makes sense to me. I don't want to put it up front, like the opening hour of my set list, and I don't want to put it at the very end either because it's a little bit too sleepy. But you can get away with it like after that everybody's been, having a few drinks, in that kind of like, call it 10 to 11 o'clock hour, somewhere in there. But as long as you have something immediately afterwards that's a little bit higher energy, that maybe people recognize a little bit, because I think after something like this they definitely don't want to hear a sleepy song. But again, time and place for this kind of like 80s era fusion music, and I think that there's plenty of great stuff on this one. But again, most notably the track "Free Spirits." All right, so the next one up, Dom Ramau. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name, but Spirit of the Times. Now, don't get me wrong, this guy has other albums from Muse that are just as good, probably better, honestly. But again, just got this in, and when I listened to it, what occurred to me, and again, thinking within the context of building a set list, people really like Latin music, even if they don't know it yet. And I think what I'm getting at is that because of the emphasis on rhythm, there's a lot of toe tapping stuff in Latin music and in Latin jazz specifically. It's stuff that people I feel like can like instantly relate to because it kind of gets you moving, or again, it gets your toe tapping a little bit, and it's a really nice anchor to have something like that that helps guide somebody through music. So again, even if you don't think the audience is going to want, say, an entire set list of Latin music, incorporating some, peppering some in, I think is a really good idea. And on this track, or excuse me, on this album, the track Highway, which is a little over 4 minutes. I think it's the last track on side one. Is that right? Yep. Yeah, it's about 4.5 minutes. I think it's a great one, great beat. It is quick, or it's a relatively brief track, so you don't have to feel like you're getting too much into it. But I find in a 4 hour set list, I'm adding in something that's like a heavy Latin beat, maybe once every like 45 minutes to an hour. Sometimes I'll do more than that. It kind of just depends on the mood that I'm in. But again, I look for this kind of stuff to incorporate, because when I started playing music, or at least when I was in college, I played a ton of Latin music. I was in a Afro-Cuban band. We played just a lot of Tito Puente, played a lot of salsa and like all kinds of stuff. And I love the music, and so therefore, at the same time, again, that it isn't about me and my taste. I do like to incorporate a lot of the stuff that I'm interested in, and yeah, again, I think this is a great album, and actually, this should be one of the like the less expensive albums by Ramau that's available. So I would encourage you to check it out. All right, so the last one I'm going to talk about in this video anyway, and I'll probably do something more that's sort of almost foundational about building set lists and my experience DJing, but I kind of wanted to again blend these two things together just because it was very timely with some of these records that I got in. But I wanted to show you Larry Young, Heaven on Earth. This is on Blue Note, and probably one that folks are at least somewhat familiar with. This is probably late 60s. What is this, 68, 69? It's something like that. Maybe people can correct me here. Oh, 68. So I think this was 1968. One of the reasons why I definitely wanted to bring this one up, though, is because organ led. Now, I know that there's a lot of folks who don't like organ. And maybe you do, and that's great. But there's a lot of people who are into this kind of like hard bop, post bop space that really don't enjoy the sound of the organ. And I think it's because they're recalling Jimmy Smith, or maybe some of like Jack McDuff's early stuff. They're thinking about like the baseball organ or church organ, and it's just not something that they get a lot of energy from. In my experience, organ the right organ led music in a set list is like just crucial. People in a cocktail bar really, really enjoy this kind of music. And I don't know, I can't exactly put my finger on it. I think one reason is that it simply sounds different in at a party. Like organ music, just like this kind of stuff sounds different at a party than it does when you're listening to it in your listening room by yourself. And I again, I don't know why, but it just does. And what I've noticed is that when I incorporate stuff by an organ player, it just it sounds different to me. Like I can tell that people are enjoying it. Um, and don't get me wrong, it's not like I'm putting on a lot of Jimmy Smith stuff either. I just think that there's a lot of these organ players in the late 60s and into the 70s for sure that their stuff just sounds phenomenal. And I'm talking about Johnny Hammond Smith and Groove Holmes and certainly Larry Young and others. So anyway, this is a great example, I think, of at least some tracks that I think would play really well. So The Infant, which is the first track on side one, it's about 6 minutes long, I think is one such example. Possibly, yeah, I think probably Heaven on Earth, which is the first track on side two. But this is just one example, and I'm not even saying that this is singularly even Larry Young's best album to put on a DJ set list. Again, it's just I got this in recently. This it's actually a promo copy, and I wanted to highlight it because I think it's I just think it's a really good example of this idea of like, again, not just playing for yourself or not playing and thinking about how others might perceive your set list. It's a little bit more about like what you think people would want to be around. Like what would people want to be in a room and have on the have on the stereo as they live their lives and have their conversations. And I don't know. I can't explain it any better than that. I don't think. But I personally think, and in fact, in all my set lists, I'm always incorporating a bunch of organ led music. And yeah, I just think you have to. I don't know. I just think you have to do it, or at least that's what I like to do. I'm not. It's not like there's one way to build a DJ set list, and like I'm giving you the only tools that are out there. This is more of just like sort of my mentality, I think, in terms of I don't know what I think about as I'm putting a list together because I am the sort of person, because I'm so inexperienced, I am the sort of person who's putting together a list in advance so that I know what I'm going to play. And I know that if I was a better DJ, then I would be the person who would just have a bunch of records and I'd pull out stuff and know exactly what everything sounds like. I'm not at that point yet. Maybe if I did this over a period of years, and maybe if I had a lot of experience, then I would be able to feel my way through through a gig like that. But that is not at all me. So great for all those folks out there who have that ability, but that is definitely not me. All right, so a little bit of a different format for a video from me. Not the hey, here's some latest finds component, but the I'm going to pick a track and tell you about why I think it belongs on a set list. Let me know if any of this resonated. I don't know actually how many of you out there may be interested in getting into this, but there are so many bars in Atlanta that are trying to find DJs, and they definitely want you spinning vinyl. And don't get me wrong, like my ability to get a Friday or Saturday night is somewhat limited just because of the type of music that I have here. Although I have gotten some Friday and Saturday night gigs, but I find myself probably more suited for a Wednesday or Thursday night to play some of this like laid back kind of stuff. And I just think every time it goes over really, really well. So hopefully for some of you out there who may be interested in getting into this, there are opportunities in your city or town for you to look into, because there's just a huge appetite, I think, to hear great music. And I think it's a lot of fun, even independent of the fact that you get paid. I mean, you don't really get paid that much. I can't imagine making a living as like a DJ of just vinyl in like your small town or city that you're in. I don't think you're going to quit your day job, but I get a lot of energy just from doing it because, if I wasn't out at a club playing music, I'd be at home playing music. And isn't it more fun to play music for people? So let me know what you think. Appreciate everyone sticking with me as always, and I'll see you next time.